Tonight on KQED Newsroom, students have taken up the call for gun control, saying adults haven't done enough. Meanwhile, gun control advocates are singling out politicians for their ties to the NRA. San Francisco Mayor Mark Farrell on what he wants to accomplish before voters pick a new mayor in June. Plus, the challenges facing the California Democratic Party as they convene this weekend. Hello and welcome to KQED Newsroom. I'm Marisa Lagos, filling in for Tui Vu this week. We begin with student activism. The mass shooting at Marjory Stoneman Douglas High School in Florida has revived a heated debate over gun control. Only this time, young people are leading the charge. Their message to adults: you haven't done enough to stop gun violence. High school students across the country are staging demonstrations, rallies, and walkouts, calling for lawmakers to take stronger action or face consequences at the polls this fall. Joining me now to talk about what Bay Area youth are doing are two high school students. Encinal High School junior Lily Conable from Alameda.
Hi.
And Oakland Tech freshman Maxwell Stern. Thank you both for being here.
Thanks for having us.
So Lily, I want to start with you. What was your reaction when you heard about Parkland?
I was devastated to see that we're still dealing with issues of mass shootings in this country. It made me scared for my own safety as a high school student, and really just absolutely devastated, as I said.
Maxwell, do you feel the same way? I mean, do you feel safe in your school?
I do feel safe in my school, but I think it perhaps is a false sense of safety because a shooting like that could happen anywhere, and we've seen it happen anywhere. So I do feel safe in my school now, but the problem is I don't know if I'll feel safe tomorrow or the day after that unless anything changes. And
do you guys have to train at school for these types of incidents? Is this something you've experienced in your going to school?
Yeah, so we've had lockdown drills before. We haven't had like a shooting drill yet, but I've heard there are talks of it next month. But we've had lockdown drills. We've had a lot of those, like teachers lock your doors, students go into your desks in case something happens, someone's banging on your door. It is scary, but it's a precaution we now have to take.
So one thing that the president has brought up is the idea of arming teachers. I'm curious, Lily, is that something you would feel comfortable with?
Absolutely not. I really don't think that weapons have any place in a school environment. School is about learning, and any weapons there could be a hazard to the students. And I also feel like it's just putting a Band-Aid on the larger issue that we have. We have an issue with gun violence in general, so arming more people doesn't really seem like a good way to help aid that.
Maxwell, what do you think you and your peers are talking about when we talk about change? What do you want to go out and sort of push politicians to do?
Well, I think politicians need to recognize that this is no longer just, sending our prayers and thoughts. And I think that it's really important that change and something happens. And I think change for youth really means stronger background checks, who has access to guns. And that, I think, is the most important issue, is who's able to own a firearm in our country. So I think change means really listening to youth and hearing what we have to say about this issue, because it is affecting all of us. I mean, we're the after Columbine generation, and this has become so normalized.
It has. Lily, Maxwell talked about stronger background checks and other sorts of legislative fixes. We have very strong gun laws in California. How do you want to focus your energy moving forward? I know you're 16, you can't vote yet, but you can certainly get out there and talk about this.
To me, it's about really unifying as students and being able to really come together for what we want collectively. And I think that's going to take a lot of discussion, and it's going to take a lot of work, because there are bigger picture things that we could ask for, but there's also little things that could really make the world of a difference.
And so I know that, we've seen some pushback from the NRA and other folks. Do you guys feel like adults are listening well enough, and or is it patronizing when they say, well, you're young, you don't really know what you're talking about?
Yeah, it's really frustrating to hear that. I don't think they recognize that. I'm going to be able to vote in a couple years, as will all of my peers and a lot of their constituents. And if they don't represent our values and our beliefs, then we will see change in the voting polls. And so I think that's something that the adults in Congress really need to hear. And I think that's really important that they understand that.
Yeah. So one thing, we know is that the NRA does have a lot of power. As we said, you will be voting in a couple of years. But are your peers feeling, when you're having conversations, Lily, with your peers, do you think that they're feeling more motivated in just the last few weeks than before?
Absolutely. I think there's something very different about this time. I think it has a lot to do with the leadership from the students from Parkland who have really just taken a stand and been so bold. And I also think that we're really seeing there's blood on the hands of the politicians who are out there and who have taken money from the NRA and who are continuing to protect the right to bear arms that are like assault-style rifles. And I just think that that's just not okay.
I mean, it seems like this might be a tipping point, but we had Las Vegas happen just 5 months ago. You know, you talked about Columbine, we saw Sandy Hook. Do you think it's because perhaps, Maxwell, that this happened at a high school and that you know, these students do have more of a voice? They understand how to work social media and other platforms.
I definitely think so. I think it's because teenagers are now, and I think that it also has to do with the fact that we lived through Sandy Hook. Some of us have lived through Columbine. A lot of us, all of us lived through the Pulse nightclub shooting and a lot of other shootings that have happened in our country. And so for this to happen, I think it's really incredibly frustrating. And, you know, we're very tired of the politicians sending their thoughts and prayers. It's now time for them to do something about it. And it becomes a point at where does the safety of our children become more important than the freedom to own a gun?
Why do you think this is such a tipping point?
I would echo Maxwell's point in saying that we're high schoolers. We're made for change. We see throughout history how youth and especially high school and college students have made such huge impacts in our country. And I think we're seeing that here. And I would also say that, yeah, we've grown up with these mass shootings. This has affected our lives. We've never lived in a world where that's not really been a part of our daily lives and our fears. And I think that's really important to note when we're talking about high schoolers versus elementary schoolers or versus adults, because high schoolers have been so directly affected at this point.
So what's next? Like, what are you guys doing this weekend in the coming months before you can actually get to the polls to make change?
We'll definitely organizing walkouts and protests and make sure that the politicians in office know that youth are listening and that youth care about these issues. I think that also educating our peers about gun control and gun violence in our country could really make a big impact. I know I'm helping to organize a walkout at my school. There's a March for Lives in Oakland and in San Francisco and across the Bay Area in a couple weeks. And really just putting the word out there that this carnage has to stop and this vicious cycle of lip service needs to end now.
Lily, I know you're helping organize some of these protests too. Why a walkout? What message does that send?
I think a walkout sends a very strong message to our politicians and also to our communities that it needs to end now. We'll keep walking out until we see some gun control happen.
Great. Thank you both for coming in.
Thank you.
Thank you.
The Parkland, Florida shooting is spurring new efforts from gun control advocates. One strategy is to single out individual politicians, like this television ad criticizing Florida Governor Rick Scott for his record on guns. Governor Scott has an A+ rating from the NRA's Political Victory Fund and is considering a run for the U.S. Senate. The ad was produced by Giffords, the organization co-founded by former Arizona Congresswoman Gabby Giffords, who survived a mass shooting attack in Tucson in 2011. Joining me now is Giffords Executive Director Peter Ambler. Thank you so much for coming in.
My pleasure.
So just today we heard that Governor Rick Scott is shifting slightly some of his positions around this issue. He says he would support raising the age to 21 for some of these gun purchases. I'm curious your reaction and if these types of sort of minute shifts could hurt the efforts to attack those types of Republican politicians who have historically been so supportive of guns.
What you're seeing right now are cracks in the foundation, and that's a response primarily to the grassroots energy that's coming from the students in Parkland and that you're seeing all across the country. You see it here in California, all across the Bay Area.
And so do you think, is this a good thing for folks who want more on the side of gun safety, or could it potentially make it a little more muddled when we're going into the 2018 midterm elections?
It's a great thing. Okay. What we ought to be careful not to do here is be too tactical, like sort of parse this and parse that. You got to look at the sort of whole truth around politicians like Governor Rick Scott.
Right.
He is, like you said, been an A+ rated governor of the state of Florida by the NRA. Florida itself has been a laboratory for the most dangerous pro-firearms policies that the NRA and the rest of the gun lobby could possibly dream up. Rick Scott had an opportunity to protect kids, communities in Florida, and not only did he do nothing, he used his opportunity, his tenure as governor of Florida, one of the largest, most important states in the country, to turn his state into the NRA's own private laboratory for policy.
So what's the strategy here? I mean, is it a state-by-state approach? Do you really think hope to change hearts and minds in Congress?
It's both and, not either or. I want to sort of take a second and go all the way back to 1994. When in 2 years into Bill Clinton's term, he lost his majority in the House, and the NRA was credited for driving a lot of those defeats and Republican gains. That defeat really hindered the strength of the gun violence prevention movement for decades and generations to come, scared the bejesus out of politicians from coast to coast.
Right, Democrats too.
Democrats and Republicans, and led to this collective giving up that occurred, that persisted all the way until 2012 in the Sandy Hook shooting. And it's been 5 years since then, during which time we've been building a grassroots army and infrastructure to fight back against the NRA and elect committed politicians across the country. What the kids are doing, though, what's really important
does
here.
It feel different? It
feels different. It's because, and it's for a lot of reasons. It's one, it's kids. Like we were discussing, I'm a new dad, and I've been doing this for a long time. I've been a dad for 15 months. I've been working on gun violence prevention for 5 years, and it feels different to me today as a father. Most Americans are parents or kids, and that's really, I think, driving a lot of change. Second, there's this additive effect. This is the third of the top 10 worst mass shootings in this country taking place within a period of 5 months. And yet you see this collective inaction from politicians owned by the NRA. The NRA spent $50 million to elect these people in 2016. And, in this inaction, in this collective paralysis, they're getting what they paid for.
But part of the NRA's power comes from how big of a group they are. And I want to know what you guys are doing to get gun owners on board with some of these safety measures, because I think that has to be part of the conversation for your side, doesn't it?
Of course. You look at Gabby Giffords and Mark Kelly. Gabby is a longtime Arizonan, former Republican, a gun owner herself. Captain Mark Kelly, in addition to being an astronaut, he's a combat veteran.
Right.
Flew, I think 42 combat missions in Desert Storm. They're both gun owners. They live in a state like Arizona. They're gun owners, and they can speak.
They're still gun owners.
They're still gun owners, absolutely.
Yeah.
And they are able to speak to the rest of the country, explain why we need to change things so kids don't keep on dying, so our communities don't experience this awful toll of gun violence day after day after day. It's not just the mass shootings that hurt this country, that leave families and communities devastated.
Right.
And they can show their own personal experience.
Great.
That you can protect kids, protect communities, pass laws that keep guns out of the wrong hands, keep weapons of war off the street, while also protecting our basic rights as guaranteed by the Second Amendment. So
quickly, we only have a few seconds left. What are the specifics? What do you guys want to see done besides obviously changing the makeup of Congress?
We're going to go district by district. We're going to elect a Congress that can actually go in there and do something.
Are we talking about an assault rifle ban?
We're talking about all the above. We need to get weapons of war off our streets. We need to make sure that every single purchase of a gun is scrutinized by a comprehensive and strong background check. We need to get the CDC and other public health institutions in this country off the sidelines. They've been prohibited from doing basic research into the problem of and solutions to gun violence prevention. That ought to change. We can save lives from smoking. We can save lives from car accidents, any number of things. We need the same collective national effort that starts here in 2018 and is driven by the sort of moral certainty of these kids.
Great.
And that's what we need to do right now.
Thank you, Peter, so much for coming in.
My pleasure.
Now to San Francisco politics. Last month, the San Francisco Board of Supervisors appointed Mark Farrell as mayor, ousting Board of Supervisors President London Breed, who served as acting mayor following the sudden death of Mayor Ed Lee in December. In June, San Francisco voters will cast ballots to elect a new mayor. Until then, Farrell will face a number of challenges, including rising homelessness as the city struggles to build more affordable housing. Joining me now is San Francisco Mayor Mark Farrell. Thank you so much for coming in.
Thanks for having me.
So you were on the board for several years prior to this. What is it like going from supervisor to mayor that suddenly, and what do you think you can accomplish in the mayor's office that you couldn't do as supervisor?
Look, being the mayor of San Francisco obviously is a wholly different proposition than being a member of the Board of Supervisors. But a few things. First of all, I'm lucky enough to be born and raised here in San Francisco, and serving as a member of the Board of Supervisors for 7 years on top of that really gave a great background to assuming this job and really running our government for the next half year. As you think about the challenges that we face as a city, it's no secret. It's public safety, it's homelessness. In addition to that, in the mayor's office over the next half year, I'll be putting together our city's budget for the upcoming 2 years, and I served as budget chair for 4 years on the Board of Supervisors. Again, so have that background that will, hopefully allow me to do a good job over the next half year.
I know that your appointment came as something as a surprise to a lot of people, and you were really backed by a group on the board that in a lot of ways you had sparred with in past years, the sort of more liberal wing of an already liberal board of Democrats. Why do you think your political foes wanted you in room 200?
Look, I think for many people, and myself included, this wasn't about one person in the job. It was the fact that at this point in time, we had one person serving as the mayor, as the president of the Board of Supervisors, as a district supervisor, and as someone running a mayoral campaign. And I think from many people's perspective, that was too much to be vested into one person. And that we wanted somebody over the next half year that was able to be simply dedicated to the job of being mayor for the residents of San Francisco. And that's why I allowed myself to have my name put in the ring, and that's where we are today.
So I understand you have some news you would like to make here about something you're going to be bringing back from Willie Brown's days as mayor, I think.
Yeah, I understand that as well, that Mayor Brown did it. But starting next week, we're going to be doing office hours at City Hall, where I'm going to be meeting with residents of San Francisco. Anybody can sign up online.
That's great.
And meeting in 10-minute slots. We're going to do this once a month on Friday mornings, just to make sure that we hear from people and that I hear from residents. They can talk about any topic that they want. Sky's the limit. I think it's really important to have an accessible, very transparent office of the mayor. And hopefully this will be something where we can really invite new ideas, hear new issues, and most importantly, continue to hear from people on the ground every single day.
I imagine one thing you're going to hear a lot about is homelessness and the housing crisis and the state of our streets. It seems like no matter how many things the city does to try to tackle that, they're just not working or not working well enough. I mean, what needs to be done differently?
What I would suggest is what we're doing is actually working on the streets. We need to simply do more of it. First of all, as you think about it, we need to stop more people from becoming homeless on our streets. We need to stop the tide.
Right, there's like 41% became homeless in the last few years, I think.
Exactly.
Like
as you think about the numbers, we had about 7,000 people that were homeless in San Francisco a little over 10 years ago. Today we have about the same number.
Yeah.
During that same period of time, we housed or placed people back with their families, 21,000 people.
Wow.
So more and more people are cycling into homelessness every single year in the city of San Francisco. First step to tackling the issue is stopping that tide as much as we can. So we're starting to invest in different programs, eviction prevention programs, giving people subsidies to stay in their homes. Because as anybody will understand, as soon as you become homeless and are out of your house, it's a whole different set of issues for that individual or families. We're doubling our efforts around Homeward Bound, which is the program where if we find a loved one on the other end of the line, we will give someone transportation money and meal money to go home. If that person promises to house that individual. Incredibly successful program. Over 70% of the people a year later continue to be housed. It's working. We have a small budget on it. I'm going to be doubling that budget this year. We need to stop that inflow in the city of San Francisco. And then with those that remain on our streets, we need to do everything we can to get them off the streets into shelter and housing and onto better lives. So we're continuing to invest. Now we have 5 navigation centers in the city of San Francisco. 2 more are coming online, and we have 2 more potentially in the hopper. So we're doing more and more for the people that are on our streets today. We need to get them off the streets for themselves, first and foremost, but also for the residents of San Francisco.
So, Mr. Mayor, one of the big issues that is coming up in the coming months is the police officers union contract. They've supported you. They are a very controversial group in San Francisco. Why should the public trust that somebody who was not elected is the right person to oversee this long-term contract?
Look, these contract negotiations come up. I would be shirking the responsibility of the office of the mayor not to enter them. And by the way, if they're not solved by a certain date, we enter into arbitration and they will be awarded regardless. But the good news is that I have professionals working in my office that are taking that job very seriously, and they're working on it every single day, and I trust them. But I will say, I am not afraid to stand behind the men and women of our police department and all of our first responders departments. They are protecting us every single day as residents, and I will always support them for that.
I know after President Trump was elected, the board created a committee to specifically deal with federal budget cuts. I don't think they've met yet. and now you're in charge of crafting the budget that the board will consider. What impact will the feds have, and what are you most concerned about as you guys sort of look forward to try to plan the city budget?
Look, at the end of the day, San Francisco, in terms of our posture as it relates to Washington, D.C. right now, is a unique period of time. Almost everything that's coming out of Washington, D.C. is against the ethos of who we are as a city. And I have committed that we are staying as a sanctuary city. We will fund our immigration programs to really combat what Donald Trump and ICE is trying to do, not only in California, but here in San Francisco. Whether it's, again, continuing to be cuts to our HIV programs here in San Francisco, we will not back down. We will continue to fill those cuts. So obviously it's a little bit of wait and see right now what happens over the next few months. It seems like every single day, if not every single week, there's a different drama coming out of Washington. So we're going to react, but we're going to react appropriately, and we're going to stick to our values as San Francisco.
Mayor Mark Farrell, thanks for coming in.
Thanks for having me.
This weekend, Democrats convene one last time before the June primary. Candidates are stumping in hopes of landing the state party endorsement. But there are also some clouds hanging over the party. Just this week, Democratic State Senator Tony Mendoza resigned over sexual harassment allegations. Joining me now is our politics team, senior editor Scott Schaefer and Sacramento reporter Katie Orr. They both joined me from the convention in San Diego via Skype. Welcome to both of you. Katie.
Thank you.
Katie, I want to start with you. You were in Sacramento just Thursday when Mendoza resigned, but we thought before that he might actually get kicked out of the Senate. Tell me a little bit about what happened and how Democrats there reacted.
Yeah, Marisa, Senator Tony Mendoza had a sexual harassment investigation into him, and it was completed. And it was found more likely than not that he'd harassed several women over a period of about 10 years. Senators were voting to either expel or suspend him. It seemed like on Thursday they couldn't really decide which they wanted to do. But in the end, they were spared from having to make that choice because Mendoza, perhaps sensing that the decision was not going to go his way, decided he would leave on his own terms and ultimately resign.
That must have been a relief for some of them. But also there are other investigations ongoing, including against a female lawmaker. I mean, how much do you expect this will be part of the conversation this weekend?
Well, I think it's an issue that they're not going to be able to avoid. We know actually that there is a safe space that's been set up here in the convention. There's a hotline people can call if they feel like they have been harassed. So in that regard, they're trying to take it seriously. I think it's something that we'll hear candidates speak about when they address delegates this weekend, because the Me Too movement has been has had so much momentum and is so important to people that I don't think they can really ignore it.
Yeah, and Scott, I mean, I know that you've been talking to a lot of folks about some of the schisms we saw really in the national party during the 2016 election between the Bernie-crats or the left wing of the party and maybe the more moderates. I mean, how is that going to play out this weekend, especially with, you know, Dianne Feinstein being challenged from her left by Kevin De León?
It's going to be really interesting. I mean, as you know, Marisa, you and I were at the last Democratic convention in Sacramento when they elected a new chair by 60 votes out of many, many hundreds and several thousand votes, and it left very hard feelings. And so the new chair, Eric Bauman, is really trying to reach out to those who didn't support him last time around. But as you said, they're some of the most active members of the Democratic Party are not necessarily moderates. You know, they are in fact the progressive wing, the nurses, some of the teachers groups, and they are the ones who are giving Kevin De León, for example, a hard look over Dianne Feinstein. They like his politics. What's complicating for him, though, we just talked about Senator Mendoza, Senator De León and Senator Mendoza were roommates until a few months ago. And so that complicates his case to women in particular, that they should vote for him over Dianne Feinstein.
And so we just heard you, Scott, talk about Kevin De León and Dianne Feinstein. I know we'll be watching that. Any other big endorsements that, you know, you think could come down this weekend?
Well, it's really tough because, you know, a candidate needs to get 60% of the vote of the delegates. And in the governor's race, for example, you've got 4 Democrats who are pretty well known: Delane Easton, John Chung, Antonio Villaraigosa, and Gavin Newsom. They all have their own constituencies. So getting to 60%, if somebody were able to do that, and most likely it would be Gavin Newsom, that would be a big, big deal. But I really don't expect that's going to happen. It really matters most, Marisa, these endorsements down ballot, where people aren't paying as much attention. They don't know the candidates as well as they do in the governor's race.
And Katie, I mean, speaking of district races, one thing Democrats are hoping for nationally is to pick up some congressional seats. We've seen at least 7 districts that are held by Republicans in California being targeted. How much energy is behind that this weekend?
I think there's a lot of energy. People feel like they really have a shot at some of these seats that they might not have in the past. And so I think we're going to see a lot of momentum around that. I've been seeing already signs and T-shirts for some of these candidates. Candidates, for instance, challenging Tom McClintock up near Sacramento. So I think that is something that will be a big part of this weekend because they're really excited, for instance, that they might be able to take over Darrell Ice's seat up north here or something like that.
But Scott, I mean, in that race, for example, you have several strong Democratic candidates vying, and others there's, you know, more than several. Is that a concern for party leaders, and how do they navigate that? Because I don't think Eric Bauman, the party chair, wants to be seen as pushing progressive Democrats out of any races.
It is a real problem because, you know, in the top 2 primary system we have in California, the top 2 finishers in the primary, regardless of party, go on to November. And so in, let's say, the Ed Royce district down in Orange County around Fullerton, you've got 5 or 6 Democrats running, and they're really well funded. And so the question becomes, are they going to split the vote up so much that 2 Republicans sneak in, which is, you know, into the finals in November? I think what you might see is if any of these candidates do get an endorsement, that the others are going to be encouraged, shall we say, to maybe run for another office at some other time, to take one for the well-being of the party, because they really, really need to pick up 1 or 2 seats in California if they're going to take back the House.
Great. Well, that is senior politics editor Scott Schaefer, KQED's Katie Orr. That does it for us. Thank you both so much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
You can find more of our coverage at kqed.org/newsroom. I'm Marisa Lagos. Tweevu will be back next week. Thanks for joining us.